In this video, we'll be going over some of the best cards that summon either themselves or another monster to your opponent's side of the field. And at number 10, we have Volcanic Queen. This is a card that can only be special summoned to your opponent's side of the field by tributing one of their monsters. In order to do this though, you do have to give up your normal summon for the turn, but it does have some other benefits. And during the end phase, whoever controls this card has to either tribute one other monster they control, or take 1000 points of damage. So Volcanic Queen is a way to get rid of one of your opponent's problem boss monsters. Maybe a Raid Raptor Ultimate Falcon who's immune to everything, for example. Because unless the card specifically says it can't be tributed, like Quintet Magician, then they can't stop the summoning condition of Volcanic Queen. So it's an excellent card for removing a very hard to get rid of monster, and would probably be a lot better if it didn't lock you out of your normal summon for using it. Although it came out in the pretty early days of the game and was one of the first versions of Kaijus, so it makes sense it had restrictions similar to Lava Golem. It also allowed you to inflict 1000 points of damage to your opponent, which made it another way to just stall and burn out your opponent. And it saw playing a handful of decks as a niche side deck addition, mainly because there's a lot of better cards to use besides Volcanic Queen, as you'll see as this list continues. And at number 9, we have Santa Claus. This card can special summon itself to your opponent's side of the field by tributing one of their monsters, but only in defense position. And if summoned this way, during the end phase, the new owner of this card will draw one card. So basically, the cost of tributing your opponent's monsters for this card is giving your opponent a +1 during your end phase. But at least you don't have to give up your normal summon like Volcanic Queen, so it is slightly better. And surprisingly, Santa Claus has enjoyed a history of competitive play in a whole bunch of random decks. You see, generally, it is better to just use a Kaiju monster rather than Santa Claus, since they don't have a downside to their summon, which is basically the exact same as Santa Claus. But Santa Claus has one little benefit which allowed it to see play over the occasional Kaiju, and that was its ability to special summon itself into defense position. Most of the Kaijus all have really high attack. Even the lowest attack Kaiju is at 2200, and there are some cards which can get rid of monsters if they attack into them, even if they can't destroy them by battle. Take Zodiac Whiptail for example. If it's attached to a Zodiac Xyz monster, it can banish whatever it battles at the end of the damage step. If you want to use a card to tribute one of your opponent's problem boss monsters, and then get rid of that card later, but you don't have a high attack monster, then Santa Claus in defense position is an excellent target for Zodiac Whiptail to remove. It's an incredibly niche situation, but it has seen some success in the past because it does have a good effect, as long as you get rid of it and kind of forget about that side effect anyway. And at number 8, we have Contact C. This card can be special summoned to your opponent's side of the field if your opponent normal or special summons a monster. Then it has a passive effect, where the controller of this card cannot perform a Fusion, Synchro, Xyz, or Link summon, unless they use this card as a material. So the condition to summon it to your opponent's side of the field is super easy to fulfill. Basically, if your opponent is just playing the game, you can get it out to their side of the field. And then it can have the potential to stop them from going through their combos. It basically locks them out of all the other methods of extra deck summoning, but Link summoning is very generous with what materials you can use. So your opponent can potentially get rid of this card very easily through a generic Link monster. But there are some situations in which you can summon this to your opponent's side of the field where they can't use it as a material, and it can completely disrupt their plays. And there's a chance they just aren't using generic Link monsters for whatever reason, in which case it's a pretty powerful floodgate to stop your opponent from doing stuff. Unless they have a way to tribute the card or destroy it with some other card effect, it's not the best floodgate in the world, but it is good enough where it has seen some competitive success in the past, and a lot more than the previous 2 spots on this list. And at number 7, we have DD Guide. This card has the effect that when it's normal summoned, you give control of it to your opponent. Then it has the effect that during each player's end phase, your opponent selects one card from the graveyard of whoever controls this card, and removes it from play. Now, the effect of removing cards from play doesn't really matter with how this card was used, because it was mainly used in a couple of Mystic Mine decks in order to give their opponent a monster, so that Mystic Mine wouldn't destroy itself during the first turn. As Mystic Mine is a really good field spell card that makes it so whoever controls more monsters cannot activate monster effects or declare an attack. So as long as you just don't have any monsters, and your opponent controls a DD Guide, then your opponent will be the one who always has more monsters than you, and won't be able to activate their monster effects. But Mystic Mine has a downside, where during the end phase, if both players control the same number of monsters, then the card destroys itself, and it counts 0 monsters in the field as both players having the same number of monsters. So you need to make sure your opponent at least has 1 monster at all times, and DD Guide was a good way to give your opponent a monster immediately as soon as your turn started. Although they don't really use DD Guide as much anymore. Generally, Mystic Mine is just used as part of other engines, or they just wait to activate it during their opponent's turn after they've already summoned a monster. And at number 6, we have Knightmare Corruptor Iblee. This card has the effect that if it's sent to the graveyard from its controller's side of the field, then you get to special summon it to your opponent's side of the field in defense position, and whoever controls this card cannot special summon monsters except Link monsters. It also has an effect when it's normal summoned, where you can special summon a Link monster from your graveyard as long as it can point to this card. Now, the way this card was played in the past was they would special summon it directly from the deck with Knightmare Mermaid, that way they could then use it for a Link summon, which would then give the card to your opponent, and kind of softly lock them out of special summoning once their turn started. So it could be used as part of a normal combo for an Orcus deck, and even if it wasn't that difficult to get around its lockdown, since you just needed to use it as a Link material for a summon, the fact that it could be done without much effort made it incredibly good, especially since it could be done without effort from an already good deck. So if your opponent started their turn with a Knightmare Corruptor Iblee on their side of the field, then they would have to immediately try to perform a Link summon with their normal summon. Otherwise, they couldn't do anything else if it relied on combos for their deck to work. So if you could just stop your opponent's normal summon, you could kinda shut them down for a full turn, since there's a good chance they wouldn't have 1 card in their extra deck to use Knightmare Corruptor Iblee for a full Link material. And it was a little bit too strong of a combo, and people thought this card might get hit on the ban list sometime in the future, but the problem kinda solved itself when Knightmare Mermaid got banned for a different combo. Without Knightmare Mermaid, you actually had to put some effort into using Knightmare Corruptor Iblee, so it still saw play because it was a good combo, but it was no longer incredibly strong like it was in the past, and kinda stopped seeing play as soon as Orcus decks stopped seeing play as well. And at number 5, we have Lava Golem. This card is like Volcanic Queen, where you have to give up your normal summon in order to special summon this card to your opponent's side of the field. Although Lava Golem requires you to tribute 2 monsters instead of 1, and it's a pretty hefty beatstick at 3000 attack. It also has the same side effects, where your opponent will take 1000 points of burn damage during each of their standby phases. Except unlike Volcanic Queen, there isn't an alternative condition to avoid the burn damage. Now, Lava Golem came out very early on in the game, and has kind of consistently seen play throughout all of the years, and even sees competitive play to this day. It also sees competitive play in Duel Links, to the point where they had to change how burn damage worked in the game to kind of counter Lava Golem. So, why does Lava Golem see so much play? Well, because the ability to tribute 2 of your opponent's monsters is a very strong form of removal, especially since so few cards are immune to being tributed. It kind of bypasses all kinds of protection, and it's also nice for that little bit of burn damage, although it's mainly seen play in decks that specifically use it for that tribute summon. You see, not every deck really needs a normal summon, and they want a little bit more tributes than what a Kaiju can provide, so Lava Golem is an excellent choice to get rid of any 2 of your opponent's monsters, and then you can kind of get rid of it at your own leisure, since it's just a 3000 attack beatstick, which you can summon to your opponent's side of the field in defense position, so you can also get the same benefits as Santa Claus, or you can remove it with monsters that have effects like Zodiac Whiptail. And at number 4, we have Gameciel, the Sea Turtle Kaiju. This card is taking the place for the entire Kaiju archetype, since the gimmick of that archetype is that you can special summon it to your opponent's side of the field in attack position by tributing 1 of their monsters. This does not take up your normal summon or restrict your summons in any other way, so all of the Kaiju monsters count as an excellent form of removal. And the reason Gameciel sees the most amount of play out of all of the Kaijus is because it has the lowest attack points at 2200. So you just summon it to your opponent's side of the field and then attack over it, which is much better than trying to get rid of whatever problem boss monster you decided to get rid of with the Kaiju, like an Ultimate Falcon or something. Kaijus are kind of the ultimate form of removal, but it's only a 1-for-1 form of removal. If your opponent isn't really playing a singular unstoppable boss monster, then it really loses a lot of its luster, and Lava Golem could be better since it gets rid of 1 more monster, if you don't need your normal summon. And a lot of decks do need their normal summon though, and using a Kaiju is one of the best ways to get rid of an oppressive negator boss monster without having to give up your normal summon either. The Kaijus also have two other really good things about them. You can special summon a different Kaiju to your side of the field if your opponent controls a Kaiju monster, and you don't have to tribute any monsters for yours. So if you have two Kaijus in your hand, you can use one to get rid of one of your opponent's monsters, and then summon the higher attack one to your side of the field. They also have access to Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, which is basically a dark hole that allows you to special summon a Kaiju to both player sides of the field, and then has a graveyard effect to search out a Kaiju from your deck to your hand. The Kaijus themselves all also have another effect, which are very rarely used, because you need Kaiju counters on the field in order to use their actual effects, which aren't really important unless you're playing a pure Kaiju deck. But if you do happen to have Kaiju counters on your side of the field, you have to be careful with giving them Gameciel, the Sea Turtle Kaiju, because he actually has a really good negate if he's able to remove Kaiju counters, as it has the effect where when your opponent activates a card effect, you can remove any two Kaiju counters from anywhere on the field in order to negate the activation of the card and then banish it. So it might have one of the best effects out of all the Kaijus as well, which could be a good or bad thing depending on if you give it to your opponent or use it for yourself if you have access to Kaiju counters, which rarely comes up when people actually use Kaijus. And at number 3, we have the Winged Dragon of Ra, Sphere Mode. Just like Lava Golem, this card requires you to give up your normal summon in order to summon it to your opponent's side of the field, except Sphere Mode allows you to tribute 3 monsters. So it's the most amount of monsters you can tribute for a card that allows you to tribute your opponent's monsters. And because it allows you to use 3 monsters, it's one of the best forms of monster removal in the game, and definitely sees the most amount of play out of all the cards which can summon themselves to your opponent's side of the field. The top 2 spots are kind of exceptions, which I'll talk about when I get to their segments. Because if your opponent has a full board of negates or unstoppable boss monsters, as long as you have the ability to normal summon, you can bring this card out to your opponent's side of the field and get rid of all of those pesky Apollouzas, Borreloads, and Dragoons in one fell swoop. And with how the modern metagame is all about bringing out as many negates as you can, this just means Sphere Mode will see more and more play in the future, since you can't negate this card's effect to tribute your opponent's monsters. I mean, they can negate the summon, but it's too late at that point. They'll just destroy the monster you graciously gave them if they try to use a Solemn Warning on it, for example. That's what's great about all these tribute monsters. The tribute itself happens as the cost, and that's the part of the effect you want, so it can't be stopped. And at number 2, we have Nibiru, the Primal Being. This one is kind of an exception to the rule, because it's the only one that doesn't really summon itself to your opponent's side of the field. You see, it has the effect that during the main phase, if your opponent summoned 5 or more monsters this turn, you can tribute all face-up monsters in the field in order to special summon this card from your hand to then special summon a token to your opponent's side of the field whose combined attack and defense is equal to all of the tributed monsters. So just like a lot of the other cards on this list, it does allow you to tribute your opponent's monsters in order to give them a monster, although it just happens to be a token rather than itself. So it totally fits with the theme of this top 10 perfectly, and does summon a monster to your opponent's side of the field, so I feel like it should at least deserve a mention, and if it's going to deserve a mention on this list, it kind of has to be at a high spot because this is probably one of the best hand traps ever added to the game, as it can completely just win you games on its own against combo decks. Nibiru is so scary that some combo decks will just stop summoning after 4 monsters if they don't have a negate and don't know if their opponent has a Nibiru in their hand or not. The card existing in the game single-handedly lowers the power level of combo decks, which means I couldn't really put it anywhere lower in this list that happens to mention this card, and it's only really being out by the top spot because it's a little bit better. And at number 1, we have Grinder Golem. This card requires you to give up your normal summon in order to special summon this card to your opponent's side of the field, and then you gain 2 tokens in the process. Now, Grinder Golem doesn't actually require you to tribute any of your opponent's monsters. The whole benefit of using this card is just getting those 2 tokens. And getting those 2 tokens used to be kind of a joke, since they could only be special summoned in attack position, and they had 0 attack and defense. They were also low level at level 1, so they weren't even that useful for synchro summons, especially since you couldn't normal summon the same turn you use Grinder Golem. Although once Link monsters came out, Grinder Golem kinda became broken overnight, because it allowed them to gain so much advantage by just bouncing him back to your hand and bringing him out over and over again, in order to just get a whole bunch of tokens to go +4 at minimum with the amount of advantage you gain from all the Link monsters you could bring out. Which could go even higher depending on what deck was using Grinder Golem, but a +4 at minimum is super good as a starter. And it was an even higher minimum when Link monsters first came out, and you add Firewall Dragon to the equation. Although, funny enough, Grinder Golem got banned before Firewall Dragon did. Alright, and that's the list. This incredibly specific topic was suggested in one of my previous videos, so if you have an incredibly specific topic you wish for me to make a video about, I would love to hear about it down in the comments. And also, did you know only 38.8% of people who watch these videos are actually subscribed to the channel?